Hello everyone, I'm Citizen Spokesman Eilon Levy. This is the daily briefing of the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's Office. We are live on YouTube, Instagram and Twitter. Please start submitting questions in the chat. These briefings are now available shortly after broadcast as podcast episodes, so you can listen to them on your drive or commute on the way to work. Search for the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's Office on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music and all major podcast platforms. Today is day 263 of the October 7th war. For months, we've been warning. UNRWA is a Hamas front. It employs thousands of Hamas members. It hires terrorists who took part in the October 7th massacre and teachers who held hostages in their homes. It covers up Hamas hijacking aid trucks. It indoctrinates children to embrace jihad. It lets Hamas terrorists fight out of its schools. It keeps alive the Palestinians' fantasies of moving to Israel and destroying it from the river to the sea. It even gave free electricity to Hamas's intelligence headquarters built underneath UNRWA's Gaza headquarters. But UNRWA's partnership with Hamas goes so much deeper. UNRWA is a Hamas money laundering machine. Yes, this UN agency helped the Hamas terror army steal $1 billion to buy weapons for the October 7th massacre and dig tunnels to hold hostages. A US lawsuit brought by survivors of October 7th reveals how Hamas's UNRWA scam works. UNRWA pays salaries to its employees in Gaza in dollars. Why? Because they need to convert dollars to shekels in order to spend them at the market. And they can only do that through Hamas money changers, who take a 10 to 20% cut for their service. That's how Hamas stole over $1 billion donated by international taxpayers to buy weapons and tunneling equipment. And that's how UNRWA funneled millions of dollars a month to Hamas's army of terror before 10/7, helping it smuggle weapons to murder and abduct Israelis. By the way, that scheme is unique to Gaza. Nowhere else does UNRWA give out dollars, only in Hamas-run Gaza. That's a smoking gun. It's intentional. UNRWA's international leadership is fully complicit in the murder and abduction of Israelis on October 7th. Here's what else is really infuriating. UNRWA helped Hamas steal $1 billion of international taxpayer aid. Your governments are taking the tax money of hardworking families and giving it to Hamas's money laundering machine. If you're watching us from the United States, Germany, France, Sweden, Japan, Norway, the Netherlands, Canada, or the UK, today when you go to work, know that your governments have been sending part of your paycheck to the Hamas terror army through UNRWA. Enough is enough. UNRWA has been hijacked by Hamas. Its leaders must face justice for aiding and abetting the terrorists threatening more October 7th. And world governments must stop funding it immediately. The UN doesn't only launder Hamas's cash. They and too many others also launder Hamas's information, amplifying Hamas lies about who died and why ever since Hamas launched their war on October 7th. Israel's new analysis exposes the UN's Hamas-based casualty numbers for the absurd lies they are. By now, we've all heard that Hamas doesn't differentiate between innocent civilians caught in the crossfire and its terrorists killed while doing terrorism. We know they outright make up some of the numbers and count every death by natural causes, every heart attack, every terminal cancer patient as killed by Israel, and that they will never acknowledge those killed by hundreds of Hamas rockets that landed inside Gaza, even when other Gazans call them out. But did you know that Hamas passes off its own child soldiers as children killed by Israel? I knew that. But even I didn't know that Hamas has actually been listing male terrorists as women. They're called Muhammad, and it literally lists them as women. Now, either Hamas has an unusual number of transgender soldiers in its ranks, or it's passing off male fighters as women to fudge the stats. Hamas are rapists and murderers. They also lie. The UN and whoever else takes Hamas's claims at face value are complicit in Hamas's brutal terror and the information war that it is waging against the Jewish people. And we know well what that brutal terror looks like, thanks to Hamas, which proudly filmed its own barbaric rampage on October 7th. We all saw young people hunted down at a music festival. Some of those who survived the Nova massacre fled to a roadside bunker that's meant to protect them from rockets. Hamas monsters threw grenades into the rocket shelter at unarmed festival goers within, trying to blow them up limb from limb. And it did. Yesterday, the families made a difficult decision to release a few more minutes of footage of those barbaric moments. Video of American citizen Hirsch Goldberg-Polin, whose arm was lost in Hamas's brutal attack, shown together with 2 other survivors as Hamas brutally abducted them into Gaza. Yesterday, we also heard that the body of Mohammed al-Atrash, an Arab-Israeli father of 13 children, a Muslim, is being held hostage by Hamas. Nothing is holy for Hamas, not even the bodies of other Muslims. Over 120 hostages are still being held, 120 hostages are still being held in Hamas's terror dungeons in Gaza. We know only over 40 of them have been killed, either on October 7th or since in captivity. The Red Cross hasn't visited them, hasn't ensured they're safe. We need you to tell your leaders, we need you to tell your friends, we need you to tell everyone to send one clear message to the Hamas rapist regime. Let them go now. We'll now take questions from audience watching on the various social media platforms. Please continue to submit those questions. Yes.
First question comes to us from Samila Seren and asks, Elon, has it occurred to Israel that hostages are not in Gaza but will require a manhunt like happened to Holocaust criminals?
The prospect that Hamas might have smuggled hostages out of Gaza is a terrifying possibility. We know that Hamas had dozens of smuggling tunnels from Gaza into Egypt, and we certainly hope that Hamas has not smuggled hostages out. I haven't seen any media reports. The army certainly hasn't made public any intelligence to that effect. But as long as Hamas has smuggling tunnels into Egypt, that's not something we can discount. Now, the hostage crisis on October 7th shows us what the threat is of a repeat October 7th on the northern border with Hezbollah. Because everyone understands that if Hezbollah's death squads were to invade Israel from Lebanon and take hostages, they wouldn't be held in Lebanon for long. They could be in Iran by the afternoon. That is why Israel is committed to pushing Hezbollah away from the northern border, away from the border over which they've sent thousands of rockets and suicide drones in the last few months, displacing tens of thousands of Israelis who cannot return back to their homes. We need our citizens to return safely to their homes. And they can't do that if they fear that Hezbollah might abduct them over the border, just like Hamas abducted our citizens in southern Israel. We need the rockets to stop, and we need to know that they will not start again. Northern Israel cannot become what southern Israel became over the last 20 years, with constant rocket fire and the fear of death squads crossing over and abducting our civilians, waking up inside Gaza or Beirut or Tehran in their pajamas.
Next question being asked by a number of different viewers on Instagram. This one coming from Ariel. What can trigger any possibility for Hamas to release the hostages as this war is expanding dramatically and needs to stop? Who can help to put actual pressure on Hamas?
Let's be clear. Hamas does not want to release the hostages. Hamas wants this war to drag on because it thinks that it is winning the global information war. It knows that if it forces Israel to continue fighting for the hostages, the protests around the world will intensify. Israel's diplomatic relations and alliances will come under strain. More UN officials will accuse Israel of made-up atrocities. And Yahya Sinwar is sitting in a tunnel somewhere, rubbing his hands, saying the world is doing our work for us. The world is giving Hamas no reason to release the hostages. We don't need to hear world leaders calling on Hamas to discover a sense of political courage and negotiate a deal to let the hostages go. We need them to tell Hamas, let the hostages go now. And we need the world to step up sanctions against Hamas, to cut off its supplies for smuggling money. We just heard in today's briefing, Hamas managed to siphon over $1 billion of international taxpayer aid through UNRWA. UNRWA would distribute money in dollars, Gazans would exchange those dollars for shekels through Hamas money changers, and that's how Hamas built the weapons it needed for October 7th. And that money laundering route is still open. Countries are still funneling money into UNRWA, which is able to therefore give it to Hamas. That has to end. Hamas's money laundering and money smuggling routes have to be cut off. We need serious sanctions against Hamas. We need the leadership of Qatar to arrest Hamas's leaders or force them out of the country. And we need all countries with any leverage over these three countries, remember them, Qatar, Turkey and Iran, to use all available pressure on those countries to get them to force Hamas to let the hostages go now. It's been moving to see world leaders say, bring them home now. But that's the wrong message. We know we need to bring them home now. We're trying. The message we need to hear around the world from our friends is a message to the Hamas rapist regime holding those hostages. You better let those hostages go now. Because if not, Israel is going to come after them itself, and we will stand by them as they fight to free the hostages from the Hamas terror dungeons.
A related question coming to us courtesy of JannyB73 on Instagram, who asks, "Hi Elon, what can we as the general public do to bring attention to the underhanded and anti-Semitic UN?"
Great question. Keep exposing it. The UN enjoys a certain moral authority or prestige. People hear something from the United Nations and they think, well, that must be true. But for months it's been obvious now just how complicit UN leaders, UNRWA leaders, World Health Organization leaders are with the Hamas terror regime. UNRWA is an integral part of Hamas's military machine. It covers up how Hamas hijacks aid. It lets it fight out of its schools and clinics. It even gives it electricity to its underground intelligence centers. UNRWA is an integral part of Hamas's military machine. Difficult as it is to hear, difficult as it is to accept, that is the message we need to share around the whole world. Your governments are taking your taxpayer money and giving it to an agency that exists in order to stymie any prospect of peace and funneling over $1 billion towards Hamas to perpetrate October 7th massacres. Call them out for the lies. Do not let them get away with things just because they have the letters UN on their business cards.
Next question comes to us on Twitter from Galut Greg, who asks, "Is Israel ready for a massive wave of Aliyah?"
Israel is the national home of the Jewish people. It exists for many reasons, for the Jewish people to reclaim their independence and sovereignty, but also to provide a safe haven for Jews around the world fleeing persecution. From Jews who fled Algeria, Morocco, Egypt, Iraq, Syria, across the Middle East, Jews who had to flee Ethiopia, Jews who had to flee the former Soviet Union, certainly Jews who had to flee Europe after the Second World War. Israel exists as a safe haven for them. It's deeply disturbing to see Jews around the world fearing for their place within Western societies. And we need only look at the terrible pogrom that took place in Los Angeles day before yesterday, or the brutal rape of a 12-year-old Jewish girl in France, to understand that anti-Semitic violence is back and it's not being taken seriously. And we welcome anyone who wants to come and make Israel their home. Come. But don't run away. Stay and fight. The diaspora needs a strong Israel, and we in Israel need a strong diaspora. We need you to fight to keep your countries sane. We need you to fight to keep your countries liberal and democratic and not allow the haters and the radicals drive them off an extremist cliff. We need you to continue fighting to make the world safe for Israel so that Israel can make the world safe for the Jews. If you want to come and live in Israel, I promise you, it's great living a 5-minute walk away from the beach. But if Jews are not safe in Canada, they're not going to be safe anywhere on earth. So we need you to stay and fight. Fight for your place in Canada, fight for your place in America, fight for your place in Britain and in France and around the world, and do not let anyone chase the Jews out. Not out of universities, not out of workplaces, and definitely not out of their countries, because they are your countries too.
This question comes to us from Dayoun73 on Instagram, who asks, how do you react to the BBC News' continual anti-Israel bias day after day?
Media bias is a problem, and that is why we have to continue fighting the information war. I want to explain to you what is at stake in this information war. Hamas is trying to make good, ordinary, decent people around the world hate Israel. They're spreading lies, and they're luring Israel to fight in densely populated areas where they know people are going to get killed, because they want to make the world hate Israel. And that's because they and Iran want to destroy Israel. And they want to be sure that on the day they are ready to attack our country with the goal of destroying it, good, ordinary, fundamentally decent people around the world will sit back and think the Jews had it coming. That's the purpose of the lies about genocide and starvation, of extermination. They are to make people in democratic countries think that Israel shouldn't exist. And so when they're going to take action to stop our country existing, they will say, they had it coming, good job. That's why it's so important to fight this information war, to give every interview we can give, to make information accessible in the general public, to make journalists understand how Hamas is manipulating them, because this conflict is so much bigger than a war between Israel and a terrorist group in Gaza. This is a war in which Israel is fighting for its life against Iran and its proxy armies on 7 different fronts, against a coalition of religious fundamentalists and extremists who are determined to destroy the only democracy in the Middle East and are priming international public opinion for the day they are ready to wipe our country off the map. That's all we have time for today. Thank you very much for joining us. I've now been running the Citizen Spokesperson project for 1 month. Thank you everyone for following. Make sure that you are following on all these social media platforms: YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, all of them. And of course, follow us on the podcast platforms as well. I'm Elon Levy. Thank you very much for joining us.